Well, thanks very much again for rejoining us. This is the panel on defending the vision. This panel is on the record, and for tweeting purposes, I wish I could tweet while I'm moderating, but I haven't mastered that yet. It's hashtag EWF 2014. I'm Barry Pavel. I'm a vice president at the Atlantic Council and director of the Brent Scowcroft Center on International Security. And I'm just really thrilled and honored to be here with my distinguished panelists, ministers of defense, and my former colleague, Sandy Vershbow, the Deputy Secretary General of NATO. It's been such a great conference where we're looking back to celebrate historic transatlantic milestones. But even today, we know that the crisis we're meeting and that we're being tested about, I think that future historians will look back at 2014. And so what we do over the next 9 months, over the next years, I think, will be yet another milestone that future conferences look back to. And so we do a lot of work at the Scowcroft Center on trends out to 2030. And my hope is today, and my goal is that this panel, this discussion, and this entire conference really sets up some of the key defense strategy pillars so that when the Atlantic Council has a conference in 2024 celebrating the next rounds of enlargement, they'll look back on the work that we did today as gratefully as we've been looking back on the previous rounds of enlargement during this conference. So let me set up a couple of what I think are the primary questions for the purposes of this panel. I mean, I think foremost is how should NATO respond to this crisis and in a way that makes us more secure as we come out the other end. In other words, not just reacting, not just tactics, as we heard Secretary Albright and former National Security Advisor Hadley discuss, but acting strategically and using this time of change to push through on measures we would have liked to have done before, but we didn't have the flux in the strategic environment to accomplish. So I'd like to sort of push through to what can we try to get out of this crisis, not just reacting, but strategically acting. And then I think importantly, what role and perspective should we take on NATO enlargement, on next rounds of NATO enlargement, and on our partnerships, and on what NATO does as an alliance, and what the transatlantic community does together in the South and in the East. And we heard some very good suggestions from the previous panels on the need, in light of some of the new tools, which we'll get to in this conference, the need for NATO and the EU to coordinate more, to deal with some challenges like energy security that are beyond the political military instruments. And I think, as Steve Hadley said very importantly, we need to get our vision going. I mean, the alliance should use this crisis as an opportunity to revitalize itself, to revitalize its machinery, to deal with the crisis, and to get the vision that we had established long ago, but we've been adapting, to get that moving again, to further strengthen Europe and to achieve our vision of a Europe whole and free. So I want to talk less, and I think I want to get to the panelists, but let me very briefly introduce them. You have their bios. I'll go in alphabetical order. Minister of Defense of Georgia, Alessandra, thank you very much for coming. He previously served as Georgia's permanent representative to the United Nations from June 2006 to December 2008, a busy time, I imagine. And before becoming Georgia's UN envoy, he served as the advisor to the Georgian president on the Abkhaz conflict, and I would love to hear from him on these strategic issues and on how Georgia sees these things. We also have the Minister of Defense of Estonia, Minister Mikser. He became Minister of Defense about a month ago. I'm not sure about the timing of this portfolio, but it is the second time he's been Minister of Defense of Estonia, and he has been the leader of the Social Democratic Party since 2010. We also have the esteemed Minister of Defense of Montenegro. Thank you again for coming to the Atlantic Council. Minister Dorisic. She was appointed as Minister of Defense 2 years ago in March of 2012. She's a professor of telecommunications, which I would imagine brings some needed expertise to the discussion of cyber and of media and other things which we'll be talking about. She also has held numerous ambassadorial positions on behalf of her country. At the end of the row, but certainly not last, Minister Stropnický, who has served as the deputy of the Czech Parliament, but throughout his career has gone from culture to politics to culture to politics, and would love to bring that set of expertise to bear as well on these very important problems, and has also held numerous ambassadorial positions. And then finally, my former colleague Sandy Vershbow, the Deputy Secretary General of NATO. He assumed the position in February of 2012. Before that, he was an Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Pentagon for International Security Affairs. Before that, a career member of the Foreign Service, numerous ambassadorial positions, including to Russia, and his educational background is on Russian studies and international relations. So we have not only the Deputy Secretary General of NATO, but an expert on Russia, and would love to hear him render his views on those questions as well. And so I think with those introductions in mind, I would love to turn to my Estonian colleague for your views, sir. How do you think NATO should deal with this crisis? What are the short-term issues? How should we respond to Ukraine's needs? And then how do we handle enlargement and partnerships? A few small questions for you.
Well, these are a few small questions to be answered in 5 minutes. Well, but let me start. The title of this panel, Defending a Vision, I think we should first ask, well, this is a vision of Europe whole and free based on these liberal democratic values. But we should ask, what are we up against? And I think there's what is this alternative vision that we need to defend ours against? And we see this expansionist, imperialist, Putin's regime in Russia trying to use the same salami tactics that the Soviets employed during the Cold War against its neighbors, against what the Kremlin has traditionally called their sphere of privileged interest. And I think that, when we see the role of political leadership, the role of government in our value system as in promoting the welfare of people, advancing the welfare of our people, then I think in Putin's dictionary, a good leader or a good ruler is something entirely different. And it's, I think when it comes to the how Putin sees his legacy, it's rather expanding the empire rather than improving the welfare of his people. And it's very, very, very dangerous. I think he has invested quite considerably over the last few years in his military capability, improving its deployability, its equipment. It's still very much inferior to what we have as the NATO alliance collectively. But it is quite sufficient to actually act aggressively against his neighbors, against the countries that he deems to be in his sphere of privileged interest. I think that one of his calculations has been, and we saw this in Georgia in 2008 and also in Ukraine right now, that he believes that time is on his side, that he can take decisions on his own. He doesn't have any sort of bureaucratic drag in decision making, and having acquired this enhanced mobility and ability to deploy his troops quickly, he can actually change realities on the ground before we can get our act together and respond adequately. And he basically believes that if he manages to change the realities on the ground sufficiently quickly, then the emphasis of the international community will be on the cessation of violence, on de-escalation of tensions, rather than immediate reversal of his territorial gains. And that actually worked for him in Georgia. I think Georgia, well, we say that Ukraine is a very powerful wake-up call for the international community. I think Georgia actually should have been the wake-up call. We decided to push the snooze button and go back to sleep. I think we shouldn't let anything like this happen this time with regard to Ukraine. Not because Ukraine is larger and more important. I think no country is less important than any other country. But because now we see a pattern. It's not one-off thing. And the previous panel basically made a very sort of ominous prediction that the Baltics might be the next region where Putin may wish to try his luck. We do, in the Baltics, we in Estonia, we have absolute confidence in the NATO Article 5. We have absolute confidence in collective defense, but obviously we would not like to see an event that triggers Article 5. We would much like to see anything like this prevented. And this, I think, leads me to my first conclusion, that a key is to actually improve our early warning capabilities, to be better warned and have a clearer idea as to what Putin is up to. I mean, it's very difficult to get in his mind, inside his mindset, but basically we should sort of redirect many of our sensors that have been turned elsewhere over the last few years back to Russia and take a much closer look at what is happening really in Russia, how the troops are moving, what is the planning going on inside the Kremlin. That's number one. Number two, I think that we should put my very big emphasis on deterrence. I think Putin understands strength, and deterring him is possible. He knows that we are superior militarily, we are superior economically, and we have upper hand, the moral upper hand. So I think that we are capable of deterring him, but we should make it very, very clear, very visible, very credible. We have been rather quick in implementing these immediate measures. I wouldn't like to call them short-term, because I don't think that they have to be short-term. Now as these immediate measures are being implemented, we should concentrate on the longer-term deterrence reassurance measures. This is being done. I hope that we'll come to a very comprehensive, strong conclusion by the time of the summit in Wales in August. And the third, final point is that I think that it's, someone said that once that a vision that is not properly resourced is a hallucination. I think that we should not sort of deceive ourselves into believing that we can actually, when it comes to defense, that we can do more with less. It's not possible. So I think that having had this wake-up call, we should all make sure that we actually properly resource what we set out to do. That is to say, put it plainly, we should actually focus on getting our defense spending where it really needs to be. Estonia is among a very select group of countries in the alliance that spend 2% of the GDP on defense. I would like to see this club much larger.
Great, thank you very much. So what I heard from you is more focus on intelligence towards Russia, more focus on deterrence, and more focus on the necessary resources to underrate our activities. I'd like to ask you a follow-up question, though, on deterrence. I mean, these initial measures, for whatever reason we can talk about, don't seem to have deterred Putin from trying to destabilize eastern Ukraine. Activities are going on as we speak in key cities, no doubt led by Russian intelligence operatives, special forces, a few sympathizers, but certainly Russian instigated and led. Is there more to come on deterrence measures? Can NATO do more? And how worried is Estonia? As you said, you could be one of the next more direct targets, and if there's large-scale instability in Ukraine, we could have instability right on the borders of the Baltics, if not within. And so this must be really quite a moment for your country.
Well, it is. In a way, I think that I said Ukraine has been a very powerful wake-up call. I don't think that we in the Baltics, or those Black Sea borderline states in the south, that we needed any waking up. I think that we were pretty much awake throughout. It hasn't been so much as a surprise for us as it was probably for some other Europeans. It's sort of we told you so moment. I wouldn't like to say that, but anyway, I think it's I just did, yeah. As a matter of fact, I think that this window of opportunity of doing some things to be better prepared in the future is not going to be open indefinitely. We have to seize the moment, as we have seized right moments in the past. I mean, with regard to enlargement, we are celebrating 10th anniversary of the Big Bang enlargement. I think it would be much more difficult politically to do anything like this today, unfortunately. When it comes to Ukraine, well, there is, as was said in a few previous panels, there is a key difference between members and non-members, allies and would-be allies, unfortunately. And this is obviously something that Putin has been taking advantage of. I think when it comes to reversing what he has done in Crimea, it will take some time and patience. There should be absolutely rock-solid non-recognition policy of this, as there should be with regard to South Ossetia and Abkhazia and their occupation. And so I think that we should make sure that what we do to punish him is not just punishment, but it's actually has very clear aim of reversing the gains he's made and making it hurt so he knows that irresponsible behavior has consequences, and these consequences are more negative to us or to him than to us. We are capable. I mean, we shouldn't be talking about Putin's regime being able to hurt us more than we can hurt him. I think it's simply untrue, and we should make sure that he understands that, and he will not get away unpunished for behaving in this sort of 19th century fashion or 20th century fashion in the 21st century.
Great, thank you very much. Now I'd like to turn to Minister Swapnitsky. What's your take on how NATO's doing so far? Are we taking the right strategy? What should we be doing, and how does the Czech Republic feel about this new environment that we're already in with a much more threatening Russia in Europe?
I'm sorry, I have a beautiful, brief 20-minute speech, so I have to throw it away and answer to the question. It's not an easy one. I would start this way, maybe. I think that we both need each other very much. I mean, US and European Union. And this should be underlined twice. We have the impression that the US priorities have changed to a certain extent. It's pretty visible. And we don't think it's the best choice. Why? Because I think, with all modesty, that even the United States need a stable, wealthy, and balanced Europe as a strong partner, as an ally, to cope with other complicated areas. And as I know, after 3 months of being minister, how the things are proceeding in Brussels, it's not a criticism, but nevertheless, it's quite difficult from time to take a common position. We are still able to do so, which is, of course, very good, but it takes a lot of work, and the big players are not always, let's say, in harmony with the priorities of the smaller ones, but that's always the case. But that's even a reason, one more reason for an important role of United States, which doesn't mean that we don't want to take our part of responsibility. That's for sure. We don't want to be protected and to sit and watch TV. I mean, we are prepared to work on our budget. Of course, that's the first enemy of any Minister of Defense. So, for example, now we are preparing the budget for the next year, and I have to say that for example, the visit of Sir Robertson or the Secretary General Rasmussen in Prague helped me, because they just said, look, you have 1.1% of GDP, so what do you expect? It was not that rough, but nevertheless. It helped me a lot. And gradually, that's my task number one, we have to push this budget upwards. That's definitely the only choice. As far as the conflict or the situation in, one more sentence maybe, I don't know whether in the United States it's the same case, because I'm not a specialist on the United States, but in Europe, I think that the population takes the peace for granted. It's something obvious, something like oxygen. Next year, we'll commemorate the end of the Second World War, and the witnesses are disappearing rather rapidly. So the young generation, or even my generation, knows the conflict from TV or PC game. And that's something that should be repeatedly explained with great patience. And otherwise, we'll not convince, as politicians, that this must be taken as a kind of sacrifice, let's say, even in terms of economic wealth or economic obligatory spending, let's say. On the other hand, of course, we must buy, if I speak about armament, we must buy the things we need in a good quality, in a reasonable price. That was not always the case in my country, for example. That makes the job even more difficult. In Ukraine, I think I would explore a bit what Sir Robertson said in Prague. We are constantly being surprised. We are always surprised. We have been, or our dads were surprised by Anschluss of Austria before the Second World War. Then, for example, surprised by the coup d'etat, to be precise, after 45 in the eastern part of the Central Europe, then by the Russians coming in Budapest in 56, then to Prague 68. We have been even surprised, of course, by the fall of the Berlin Wall, and we are surprised again and again. So what can we do not to be so surprised always? Frankly speaking, Mr. Putin repeatedly said since 2000 or something like that he will try to restore somehow a kind of big Russia. Mr. Medvedev spoke the same language, absolutely. They even spoke about the notion of protecting the Russians abroad, a very dangerous sentence. He spoke about necessity to invest in the army, and he did so. And we just were sitting and watching all that, and then surprised by Crimea. And Crimea is a fait accompli. Nobody is talking about Crimea anymore. Okay, so that's lost. Let's look at the east of Ukraine, what will be happening there. And we are only reacting. He is provoking, he is testing us, he is mocking at us. And our reactions are, I'm sorry to say so, but we don't have a space to maneuver, that's true. But on the other hand, the reaction is weak. And as said, our Estonian friend, Russia, and that's not a prejudice, please believe me, we have a certain know-how about it, understands only a strong voice, only the language of strength. It doesn't mean military conflict. But if Mr. Putin repeatedly lies, maybe it would be better to tell him, you lie. We don't say you lie, we say, are you ready to negotiate, please? That's maybe not the best reaction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to come back at you on one point, because the Czech Republic's really well placed. We've heard a bit about a divide in Europe, on the question of the strength of the response to Mr. Putin, in particular on economic sanctions, which hit some more disproportionately than others, and on energy issues. But sort of as the Czech Republic, I mean, are you satisfied with the response of all NATO members and of all of the EU? And do you see the Czech Republic itself developing the necessary defense resources to deal with what's likely to be a sustained crisis, if not a new era in international relations?
One can hardly be happy with the sanctions, to be honest, because I think that they may seem, even for Putin, in some respect, ridiculous. On the other hand, I repeat that we don't have the space to maneuver. And Europe, for example, Europe is not ready, not yet, for a bigger economic sacrifice. And as we are, as everybody knows, dependent from the point of view of energy supplies, the space is very limited. So the first thing I would say is, and not only me, is some common policy in terms of energy in Europe, which is obvious task number one maybe for the years to come. Otherwise, we'll be always weaker than we want. And we have missed the right time to react. That's what I have been talking about. Now the possibilities are really restrained. The right time was at the beginning of the 2000, 2001, or when we were witnessing the first strong proclamations of Mr. Putin. And I think that it was really pretty clear that he will go on in this direction. Nevertheless, if there is a major event in Ukraine, some real clash, I think that there is the capacity within EU, for example, for a certain economic sacrifice, which means serious economic sanctions. But it will come at the very end. I mean, I would say. That's my guess.
Great, thank you very much. Minister Sanya, I'd love to turn to you right now. You are the Minister of Defense of a country that's been invaded by Russia just 6 years ago. What's your sense of how NATO's handling this? And then what sort of advice would you give to the Ukrainians on how to deal with what's essentially a slow motion invasion of their country?
Well, thank you. First, I want to express my gratitude to Atlantic Council for putting this together. It's very timely, and it's very important discussions that we're having in this room. Well, on the other hand, Georgia doesn't get anything for granted because we went through our filter of experience with Russians for the invasion, the war in 2008, and this is why probably the Georgians put a lot of faith in NATO and European integration. 80% of population supports NATO integration, 85% European Union integration. From our side, I think what we really need to see continuing is, and very important for us to see the Americans and Europeans working together. This unity of cross-Atlantic actions is very important for us to be reassured. Second, I think it's also important for the United States to show the leadership. And I think this is what about to happen because this is something that now lays with the superpower like United States to make sure the next steps that NATO will make, for example, on the summit, which is in September, will be adequate in the response to what's happening in Ukraine. I think we're talking about the membership action plan, but we don't really know how the discussions will gonna end up, while honestly, in fact, we should be talking after Ukraine about the accession talks of Georgia and other aspirants to NATO. But this is the way it is. Now we're putting a lot of efforts in transforming the Georgian armed forces after the 2008. I commissioned the lessons learned, which gave us a full picture of what went wrong on the military side, and we're improving this. We're putting together our military forces that are now capable of being a great partners to NATO troops in Afghanistan. We're not just a partner, we are actually contributing more than some other NATO countries in Afghanistan, fighting shoulder to shoulder with your guys. We just volunteered to be a part of the European mission in Central Africa. So all of this means that Georgia is actually pushing above its share of responsibility, and we think that responsiveness should come from NATO on the summit that will have the impact. Now, I want to make sure that we understand that the response should have a strategic implication and the print. I think the sanctions that we're talking about, this is something that will come and go. As soon as the crisis, one way or another, will end or will be freezed, I bet that in 3 to 6 months, business will be as usual with Russia. So this is why we should do something that will have strategic importance. What is this? This is expansion of NATO. This is another round of enlargement, actually starting the enlargement with Georgia and other allies, aspirants who are putting actually a lot on a plate on security stuff. And also, we talked about the military deterrent a little bit. I want to make sure that we understand that without military deterrent, nothing going to happen. And I think it's rightly now they're thinking through to put additional military assets in the NATO countries, Eastern countries, but we should not forget about the partners. And I think what Caucasus should see and Georgia should see more limited time maybe, but protracted exercises from the NATO countries to have a footprint in Georgia. This is one thing. Another, a lot of trainings that we can do together in the regional context, Turkey, Georgia, Azerbaijan. We have to have the very good strategy of security enhancement cooperation about how we're going to defend the critical infrastructure, the pipelines, gas pipelines that are running through Georgia. This is very important to have alternative energy resources for European Union. Now, on Ukraine itself, I think 3 things they need most is to have legitimate government, a legitimate president. This is lacking in the Ukraine, and this is one of the targets of the Russian aggression, not to make sure that there's not going to be legitimate elections. Second, to have a very efficient strategy how to fight the corruption and how to fight the infiltration. The counterintelligence services should be very active to make sure that they are loyal national peoples, loyal to the state people are in the places. So this is 3 major challenges I think they are facing. I'm very glad to hear from IMF and other donor organizations that they are putting together with the United States the economical package, and this is the way to go. in short, I want to make conclusion that Russia always creates the new reality on the ground. Then they eye the new target and only then start negotiating with the West. Now West has to seize the opportunity, as my colleague was saying, and to create the reality on the ground by accepting the membership of aspirant countries to NATO, by putting some defensive, purely defensive assets in aspirant countries and predominantly Georgia. Air defense capabilities, this is something we need to put in Georgia, and Russians will understand that you're serious. And some other actions that we'll be discussing bilaterally as well with the United States while I'm here. So in combination, it's going to be economic and the financial sanctions, putting military deterrent closer to Russia's border, and helping Ukraine in achieving these three main goals that they have. So I think we are on that track. I'm very positive that the US and the European Union is working together on sanctions and other defensive measures. And that's the reality we are in. And I think crisis created an opportunity to again make sure that we understand why NATO was created. So importance and relevance of NATO is validated what they did. We just need to keep continuing expanding NATO because that's the only organization that can really fast-track the spread of freedom, democracy, and the security. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I loved your response because it talked to strategy, but also some of the specific things that we should do. But let me ask you sort of a two-part question. Should, as part of its measures now, should the alliance or should NATO members provide defensive weaponry to the interim Ukrainian government, number one? And then number two, Russia's focus seems to be on destabilizing the May 25th election in Kiev and making sure that doesn't happen, or at least that it's not perceived as legitimate. Should we be thinking about what we want to do about that now instead of waiting for that eventuality to come to pass?
Oh, definitely yes. We have to provide defensive capabilities to Ukraine that will actually help them to stabilize what's happening in Ukraine.
Thanks very much.
Sure.
Now I want to turn to your colleague, Madam Minister. Would love to hear your views on these exact questions. You come to this panel with a unique perspective from Southeastern Europe, and we would really love to hear your thoughts on NATO's response. What does it mean for enlargement and NATO partnerships as well?
Yes, thank you. Let me first begin with thank you to Atlantic Council for enabling us and for giving us this opportunity at this very specific moment from the point of especially Montenegro, which we do consider to be the first in the row to become the next full member of the NATO alliance. That's why we are using every opportunity to talk with our partners and to actually clarify between us how important it is to continue with the process of the open door policy, but to continue with the process in an effective way. So I do believe that, of course, when we are talking about the vision for the future, when we are talking about the future of the alliance, we already have been all, and you at the first place being inside, of the fact that this year might be also crucial no matter the developments we are having lately. So everyone was expecting that after the end of the mission in Afghanistan, you should be working, and we as a partners with you, on trying to find out what would be the position and the role of NATO in the future. But also I don't believe that we should be going that far, since we should be more focused on what is actually the mission given to NATO at the moment of its foundation. So back in 1945, the founding fathers of NATO were talking about what should be, even at this moment, considered as the right messages. There I come to this Article 4 and 5, and what is the main outcome of that? That is about solidarity. And there is no doubt that actually solidarity was somewhere the base of what were the greatest success of the transatlantic relations in the past. Starting from, of course, what is the latest strategic concept from Lisbon Summit, and then coming to the enlargement as such. So if it wouldn't be for the solidarity, we wouldn't be in a position to celebrate this year this big bang we were having. And as you rightly said, we all believe that in 10 years we will have another 10-year celebrations, not the big bang, but still. And there actually, what we do believe is that the effective open door policy is giving a lot of opportunities, not just for the country which are aspirants, but also for the alliances as such. So talking about the new challenges, there is clear need to revitalize what is the position of NATO in this new world of the 21st century. Maybe there was a lot of us who thought that in 1989, with the fall of the Iron Curtain and the Berlin Wall, we wouldn't be in a position to talk about these different poles in the world, that the story about bipolar world is somewhere over. But also with everything which is happening in the last months, I think that we are all becoming aware that we might be facing some residues from what the Cold War was. And that means that we've got to have all very clear answers in order to pursue the mission of the European Union, of NATO, in building the global peace in the world and being more closely in further developing Europe as a whole and a free place. We shouldn't just think that we might be hoping for the further democratic developments with no further efforts. So everything which has been done in the past, of course, resulted with, I would say, very intensive development in the democratic sense of all European countries, no matter those which are part of European Union or NATO, but the others who were hoping to become the parts of these international organizations. And that perspective, which was clear, actually helped to all of us to do what was necessary. We've been doing all these reforms for our own sake, that's quite clear. But still, this kind of incentive for becoming a part of the organizations which are based on these principles is something which facilitates all the processes. And that's how we are specifically saying Montenegro, having a great success in what is the democratic development, what is the development of all rules which are necessary for independent justice, what are the rules for protecting minorities, for preserving human rights. And it is very then important to have the result of everything we are doing. And some of the results are part of our own good, a part of our further, I would say, progress would be to have that security umbrella. Of course, we'll try on our own to provide as much as possible. And we already proved to be capable of providing that kind of, I would say, if I may say, services to not only our country, but also to the region, and in the last couple of years to the alliance as well. And that's why we are present in Afghanistan. We just started our presence in a number of European missions, European Union missions, now starting with Mali and Central African Republic. Everything showing that we actually have passed a great path towards becoming a full-fledged partner of developed countries. That's why it is very, very important that the open door policy would be having some specific and concrete results on the next summit. We do know, and we all aware, that when it comes to the enlargement, it's always a political decision. We are living in a moment which is full of challenges due to the developments we are having in Ukraine. And everyone who would be thinking that these events there do not have any influence on the Balkans and on Southeast Europe wouldn't be right. We are living in the region which passed terrible developments in the 90s, where still not all the issues have been resolved. NATO had, I would say, an important role in putting the region in the place where it could be considered as more safe and secure, but not completely safe and secure. So we all remember what were the NATO presence there. Still NATO is present. Still it's a guarantee of what was an excellent, I would say, and very much awaited agreement between Belgrade and Pristina, which wouldn't be possible without NATO involvement as well. So having all that in mind, having in mind the developments which are present in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and having in mind that Montenegro is somewhere in the middle, always ready and always present in trying to resolve all the regional disputes, and having in mind that NATO actually showed that with the principles which are there present, many of the countries were very much encouraged to resolve these kind of issues in a manner to preserve good neighboring relations. I believe that the size of Montenegro is not something that could play a significant role in deciding where is the place of Montenegro. There is strong commitment, there is strong political will inside Montenegro to pursue with all the reforms and everything which is needed to show our interoperability with more developed countries. But still, we do expect from all our partners to be aware that we already did have a couple, I would say, warnings in the last months showing how these developments in other parts of the world, especially regarding Russia and Ukraine, could be transponding down there in our region, and none of us would like to be a part of that kind of a problem. So that's why we are extending invitation to all our partners to go closely, to look closely on what is happening also, and what might be the consequences for our region. And no one wants to actually get away from this vision, which is Europe whole and free.
Thank you very much. And I think, as your colleague next to you pointed out, we're very good at being surprised. And I think it's important to remember the points you've made, that in the South, just because there's not an active problem right now or a very obvious problem like there is in the East, it's a good idea to try to stabilize that region as much as possible to anticipate further developments. Let me now turn to the Deputy Secretary General of NATO, Ambassador Vershbow. A lot of fodder for you to address, and I think we'd love to hear your views on these issues.
Well, first of all, let me thank the Atlantic Council as well for organizing this conference, which is indeed extraordinarily timely. And I think it is important, with the different anniversaries of the different rounds of enlargement, to recognize that it has really been a tremendous success. But at the same time, as others have said, the task is still not finished. And we're dealing with a very different environment than when we launched this process back in the 90s, because we have a president of Russia who is actively trying to put up obstacles to our effort to complete the vision of a Europe whole and free. A leader who's changed borders by force, who's now actively subverting a sovereign neighboring state with covert means through an information campaign. And in his remarkable and chilling speech to the Duma on the 18th of March, he actually tried to blame NATO enlargement for what he did in Ukraine, and to use NATO enlargement as the excuse for the illegal annexation of Crimea. And of course, he's trying to draw some new red lines regarding the further enlargement of the alliance, especially to countries from the former Soviet Union. So we have a challenge to our policy and to our principles, and we have to, first of all, not water down the vision. We have to maintain our commitment to the principle that sovereign states in not only in Europe, but throughout the world, have freedom of choice when it comes to their form of government, their elected leaders, and their security relationships. And we cannot allow what's been going on in the last few months to cause us to depart from that vision. And also, we have to do a better job in countering the false narrative that is being propagated now by the Russian media and by the Russian leadership. Many of the people in this room remember how we proceeded in the 90s. The aim from the very outset was to create an all-inclusive European security system with a place for Russia in that system. We created new institutions, including today's NATO-Russia Council. We brought Russia into the G8. We sought to demonstrate in practice that we didn't see Russia as an adversary, but as a partner, by undertaking the unilateral commitments of 1997. And at that time, of course, Russia said it saw NATO as a partner. And there were some good examples of cooperation, including our forces shoulder to shoulder in the Balkans in 2 different operations. But now Russia's trying to rewrite history. And of course, they've not just rewriting, but tearing up the international rule book. So we have to draw the appropriate conclusions. Yes, the door should be kept open to Russia for the longer term. It's still in our interest to have a partnership with Russia. There's still many shared threats and shared interests. But we have to be realistic because Russia's made it entirely clear that it doesn't view NATO as a partner right now. NATO is the adversary, if not the main enemy in Soviet parlance. So you know, we have a new strategic environment. We have to adapt accordingly, and NATO has adapted very well to previous shifts in the security environment, and I'm sure we'll be able to do it again this time around. Now let me speak in more concrete terms about how NATO is responding to the crisis. Many have already used this buzzword that, first of all, we're going back to basics. We're not abandoning our current missions or the full range of our core tasks, and there are indeed many other threats out there that we still have to prepare for. We can't become Russo-centric. But we will be focusing more than in the last few years on collective defense. And we have undertaken a series of short-term reassurance measures. This includes augmenting NATO's Baltic air policing mission, regular surveillance flights over Poland and Romania. Additional exercises are underway on land and at sea. The United States has been first out of the box, but other allies are now stepping up with meaningful force contributions, including the UK, Germany, Denmark, France, Canada, the Netherlands, and Turkey, and I'm sure more will follow. So we're going to sustain and build on these measures between now and the end of the year, and we'll continue them beyond the end of this year if we have to. Now, in the medium term, we have to take more fundamental decisions. We need to re-examine our defense plans. We have to upgrade our NATO response force to make it more capable of responding quickly in days, not weeks, to short warning scenarios. And we should be thinking about whether to bolster our Connected Forces initiative, which was launched last October, with more frequent high visibility exercises and a greater emphasis on scenarios at the higher end of the military mission spectrum. Looking at the Wales Summit agenda, while many of the deliverables we've been working on for the past year are still valid, we have to look at the agenda in an entirely new light. The crisis has made clear that we need more deployable forces to meet not only out-of-area contingencies, but in-area contingencies, because defending the new members, even if we reconfigure our force posture, will require the capacity to reinforce, to deploy forward quickly. And that has to be accompanied by the necessary logistical and host nation support arrangements. And of course, does require that nations start spending more money. As the virtuous Estonian minister has said, only 4 countries meet the 2% goal, and that just can't be sustained any longer. As we start a new cycle of the NATO defense planning process, we have to perhaps put more focus on the capabilities for collective defense and deterrence, and be even more aggressive in encouraging allies to participate in smart defense projects to get more bang for the buck or more bang for the euro. Now, regarding our political posture, we still will, at the Wales Summit, give high priority to partnerships and indeed closer integration and interoperability with like-minded countries like Sweden, Finland, and Australia can be a real force multiplier for NATO, which can help us meet the challenges of the new security environment as well as some of the out-of-area threats. We need to step up our support for the defense reforms and the military modernization of Russia's neighbors, and that's not just Ukraine, but also Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, our partners as well. And we need to be strengthening NATO's role in defense capacity building more generally. There may be areas, I'm picking up on what Minister Alessandria said, that we can assist Russia's neighbors, and indeed all of our partners, in the area of critical energy infrastructure protection. We just had a mission in Ukraine recently consulting on their infrastructure situation, which is, like most of their situation, rather dire. And we have in the past conducted exercises in our partner countries, and maybe that deserves an upgrade as well. Permanently stationed forces, as the minister suggested, may be a little more controversial, but I'll take the suggestion back to Brussels. Now, last but definitely not least, we do have a challenge in conveying a strong and convincing message on enlargement at the summit to make clear that our open door is really open, that the process remains merit-based, and that it's taken only in consultations between the allies and the aspirant countries involved, that no third party has a veto, de jure or de facto. As you probably know, the process between now and Wales is as follows. Our foreign ministers will be reviewing the progress of the 4 aspirants at their meeting at the end of June in Brussels. And honestly speaking, at this point, we don't know whether any of the 4 aspirants will be judged ready for an invitation at the summit to begin accession talks. But whatever the decision in that regard, our challenge is to demonstrate in deed as well as in word that we intend to work proactively with the aspirants to help them meet the standards for membership as soon as possible, that will help them deepen their integration with the alliance, and that we will not allow other powers to draw red lines or to challenge the fundamental principle of freedom to choose one's security arrangements. Finally, of course, this crisis requires a coordinated and a comprehensive response in which NATO is only one player. And I agree with the points that were made in the previous session, that this is a time when we can't afford the institutional dysfunction in the relationship between NATO and the European Union. If we're going to really have an effective strategy for shoring up Ukraine and other of Russia's neighbors, if we're going to help them defend their sovereignty and their independence, to build strong institutions, NATO only has one piece of the action. We need a comprehensive strategy, much more coordinated than it is now, between NATO and the EU, between the United States and the EU. And I think that the character of the challenge requires nothing less than that.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Let me ask the panel a question that was just that comes to me from an Atlantic Council member, Steve Shapiro, but that hits on this exact issue. I mean, it strikes me when we look at the last 6 to 8 weeks that Putin has been much more agile than the West, and agile in the sense that not just even in the crisis, but in the last 8 years, taking a lot of measures with tools that our governments don't wield as nimbly. And here I'm talking about funding pro-Russian mayoral campaigns in the Baltics, using cyber on a sustained basis, building up the energy situation to the point where it is today, throwing cash at various other Russian favorable activities, propaganda, intelligence operatives, sort of a full gamut of tools that I don't think the West sort of, certainly on a sustained basis, has even recognized sort of, first of all, but second of all, how do we handle this sort of new set of tools that Russia will keep using? Is the coordination between NATO and the EU the only way to get through this? And if so, how can we strengthen that? Or if not, should we develop some new mechanism that works across these tools in a more nimble fashion? Because it strikes me Russia's playing a certain kind of game, and we're not even sort of in the arena when we're talking about sort of how to counter these very sophisticated Russian measures. And I would throw that out to the entire panel. Yes, Mr. Mixer.
Well, if I may, I think it's not entirely new. Actually, we saw the Soviets doing pretty much the same thing during the Cold War times. They were trying to subvert all the democratic governments all over Europe. They were sponsoring those left-wing terrorist groups or the extreme left political parties. And so it was, in a way, the same thing done in a slightly different way. But I think that is a problem, and it actually connects this issue with the enlargement issue. There is a sort of natural reluctance of democratic nations to fight wars, or to fight at all. And so there's a sort of natural tendency after an end of a war to demobilize and to start spending resources for sort of peaceful development and reconstruction. And we have addressed that at the end of the Second World War by creating the Collective Defense Alliance. But actually this Collective Defense Alliance did pretty much the same sort of demobilization after the end of the Cold War. And again, we see that the non-democratic nations or non-democratic regimes do not have the same tendency to demobilize at the end of the war. And indeed, they don't really have to, because they don't have to respond to the immediate needs of the people. They can act pretty much as the guy at the helm decides to act. And I think how this leads to enlargement, I think, is that we created NATO and we addressed the problem by resorting to collective defense, so that we can actually spend somewhat less than we would otherwise have to spend in order to counter all these threats, each one individually. But when we come to the creation of NATO, it was created not because of the perceived security surplus by the European allies, but because of the perceived security deficit. And all the aspirant countries throughout all the rounds of enlargement have actually been seeking to join the alliance, not because they had security surplus to share with others, but because they felt security deficit. And of course, standards are important, and standards will have to be met. But I think when it comes to the political decision, then we should not expect the aspirant countries to have resolved all the outstanding political issues, outstanding security issues before actually seeking to join the alliance. This is not an alliance of comfort. It's a very serious defense alliance intended to actually provide security for those who share the values and meet the standards. So I think that we should depart from this principle.
Great. Ambassador Vershbow, and then we'll take a couple of quick questions from the audience after the panel.
I would agree that the information warfare that we're now dealing with is a challenge which we're definitely not quite we're not meeting it yet, and we have to do a lot more. I mean, it isn't by any means new. I mean, let's remember the Orange Revolution. There was two elections. There was one that was manipulated by Russia, and then the people rose up, so history repeated itself again earlier this year. But we're always going to be fundamentally handicapped, of course, because we do tell the truth, and we do have some standards when it comes to the truth. And we're dealing with a situation where the other side is just making things up out of whole cloth, aggressively distorting the historical narrative, current events that are unfolding on the ground in Kiev. And it's becoming even more egregious when the label of fascist is still being applied to the new leaders, the interim leaders in Kiev, when the pro-Russian forces are using whips and baseball bats and beating the hell out of people for just carrying the Ukrainian flag. So, but we have to raise the level of our game, and this is, of course, not a NATO responsibility as such, but we, the West, need to think about old-fashioned techniques like radio and TV broadcasting, using the internet to perhaps provide Russian programming that can counter the false narrative and the slanted news coverage coming out of the Russian channels, which has huge impact across the former Soviet space. We're learning how to use social media more aggressively. We're trying, from the NATO point of view, to set the record straight when the Russians distort the historical record about NATO enlargement, about the 1997 Founding Act, and also to get our people out there into the field to engage and correct some of the disinformation about NATO. But this requires a comprehensive effort, and it also will require some real resources. Even as we raise defense spending, we're going to have to think about budgets for information activities and public diplomacy as a strategic priority.
Thanks very much. One quick point, and I want to go back to one word you said, and then we'll go to a question. Yes, sir. Please.
No. Actually, we also see in Georgia now, actually, the rise of the flashing money from the agents of influence from Russia. This is all happening, and I just wanted to emphasize the responsibility of the nation states to make sure that they have all the legal authorities, counterintelligence, all this stuff together, not to let it happen, because we have, I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do on your own as a nation state to make sure that you're deterring this. On the other hand, when the countries like aspirant countries right here are performing, they're contributing the common security, they're contributing the troops, they're part of the security environment which we operate as a Euro-Atlantic country. We need, and we have a public support to European and Euro-Atlantic integration. We need the validation from NATO, from you, that we are doing the right things. So the NATO summits, ministerials, this is exactly the places where you need to validate that we are on the right track, and we are also the role models for others in the region to follow. So they have also going to have a chance in the future. So this is very important to have timely acknowledgement from the NATO side that these countries are doing the right things. They're meeting the criteria, then they will be part of the NATO without with consent of Russia.
Thanks very much. We'll go to the audience for a question or two, but I just want to ask one question about a phrase you used. You said pro-Russian forces. Are these pro-Russian forces or are these Russian pros? Yes. Or both?
I think it's, evidence is mounting that it's both. I mean, the notion that these are entirely indigenous forces has now been proven wrong, even out of the words of one of the Russians involved, Mr. Strelkov, AKA Mr. Gherkin, who has openly said to Komsomolskaya Pravda that 2/3 of my people are Ukrainian and 1/3 of them are Russians. And he describes some of them as veterans of the war in Chechnya. So,
Georgian.
Yeah, indeed. So there should be no longer any doubt. It's beginning to leak out even in the Russian media.
Great. So the Russian pros. Now we'll take a question from the audience. Please wait for the microphone. Please identify yourself. Ambassador Valicek in the third row.
Thank you, Barry. Tomasz Walaszek, Slovak ambassador to NATO. An excellent panel, thanks. Strong agreement on the need for NATO enlargement to be part of the strategic response. But I wonder if the way we go about enlargement needs to change to account for the far greater pushback from Russia that the next rounds will inevitably face. And that's somewhat different from the previous rounds. Russia was never entirely happy, but the sort of the vigor and the violence with which it is opposed is obviously gone dramatically up. And it seems to me that they might actually require an adjustment on our end as well. The old way of giving a map and then leaving the countries 5, 10 years, 15 years in case of Macedonia, essentially in a limbo where they face all of the Russian pressure with none of the support and none of the guarantees that might actually deter Russian pressure, that approach might not work, which is why I thought it was important in Irakli, Minister Al-Hassania, that you mentioned that you're essentially after map and some sort of an air defense presence at the same time, because that goes exactly to the heart of what I was talking earlier. Let me turn this into a question for you, Minister, if I may. Have you given much thought to the sequencing of what you are asking for, as in map first and some of the defensive measures later, or possibly doing it the other way around?
Thank you. Thank you. I cannot agree with you more, Ambassador, about the actually changing the phasing of the enlargement, and that's why I mentioned that probably we should be talking about accession talks, not the MAP at this point, after what happened in Ukraine, but things are where they are at this point. I think we already have a good and dynamic relationship with NATO, with the United States on the military side, and we just need to enhance this. I mean, it's not going to be a surprise that the troops will come and train in Georgia because we've done this a number of times. So what is important here now to put some deterrent capabilities on the ground, like the defense, air defense and anti-armor capabilities that will give us the chances to defend our freedom. Because we know if things will go wrong at this point, no one is coming to save us. I mean, we've seen it in 2008, and that's the reality we're living in. So we need to have a tool to defend our freedom if this will come to that. But obviously, we need to avoid the situation.
Great. I saw another question over here in the second row.
Yeshkovar, I'm Croatian ambassador. Question or comment? Yeah, a comment. It is obvious that Russia has already territorially crippled every aspirant in the vicinity of the Russian borders, which doesn't make the aspirant palatable for the enlargement. But now, the next phase is actually disabling democratic processes. We have to react on that. But I would like to bring to your attention that there is an area which is still very prone to deficiency in the democratic processes, and that is the area of the Western Balkans. We're talking about the need for unity. We have to, for example, bring to attention the fact that 4 NATO members do not recognize Kosovo. we have to bring to the attention that Macedonia is ready for membership already from the Bucharest summit, but we have a spat about the name that we have to resolve. And after all, well, Montenegro is all but ready. We have time to help them to make the last miles of the way and invite, for example, Montenegro as a symbolic gesture to Cardiff to start the accession process. So this is what I wanted to say. Well, maybe some of you would like to comment.
So brief comment, especially Madam
So
Minister.
just following what Ambassador said is that, of course, and Mr. Rajbro previously, that we are talking about the standards and we are talking about interoperability. Of course, we are all waiting for the progress report for our Ministers of Foreign Affairs end of June, but somehow I'm pretty sure that Montenegro is concerned following whatever we've been having up to now will be very positive. And there we are a little bit caught in this situation where it might be challenging to consider an individual country being invited for a membership, not the number of countries as it was the case before. And that is also one point where NATO has to show some kind of flexibility and the right response to the moment we are living in. Of course, I would be the happiest one if we would be having mechanisms to have all four in at the same time. But following what was the process up to now, somehow I have doubts that it could be just overcome as such. So some kind of procedure will still be followed. And in that matter, what I see as a kind of little bit of a challenge when we are talking about that is that individual approach or a collective approach towards a number of countries. And therefore, I would like to, of course, raise the awareness of all of us that having the right answer at the right moment would mean to be flexible in that matter as well.
I think that we've said repeatedly that we should not go back to business as usual with regard to our relations with Russia, but I think that it's not time for business as usual also in other matters. We should, when it comes to integration of the Euro-Atlantic space and consolidating the area of democracy, I think we should also be ready to move much more decisively now than was the case during this post-Cold War sort of period of peace in Europe. When it comes to Russian attempts to cripple the aspirants territorially, then among the original members of the alliance, there was one territorially crippled nation, that was Germany. We had West Germany in the alliance and East Germany on the other side of the Iron Curtain. And it was, I mean, the fact that the Soviets managed to seize the eastern part of Germany didn't preclude Germany's joining NATO. Rather, it made it imperative to create the alliance and to consolidate the area of we had won for the democratic world. So I think that we should be much more decisive in right now than we perhaps were during the 1990s.
Just one sentence I want to follow up. What happened in 2008 on Georgia was that somehow Georgia, after the attack, became the inconvenient friend. That, whoa, this country has problems with Russia, maybe we can scale down the approach. We don't want to have this again. I mean, what happened in Ukraine should be really changing our mindset. We don't need, I mean, if Georgia is a good partner and others in Afghanistan, we're fighting, we're coming together when the need of security is there, and suddenly if there is a challenge with Russia, then we want to hands off saying, well, that's too much irritation for it. So this needs to be changed. And when we're going to see this validation from your side that we are as much needed partners as we need you, then I think we're going to change the mindset of Putin again, because that's what he respects, the action. And the action is some number of things. Membership action held to us, membership to SAMS, and what is most important, giving on the ground, putting on the ground some military assets that will give him a wake-up call.
Yeah. I think, first of all, on the issue of countries getting in alone rather than as part of a group, that I think is fully allowed by the policy, and I think it's quite possible. So let's see what happens in June. Nothing is pre-cooked when it comes to the evaluation of the aspirants. And I think that the debate is going to take on a more strategic character than it would have before this crisis, I think, precisely because, as Ambassador Walashek said, we are dealing with Russia that is pushing back not just on specific countries, but on the whole idea of enlargement, trying to make us feel guilty about something which has in fact been a tremendous success story. So that could influence the debate on whether one or more countries is ready for an invitation. But also, I think we'll raise questions that we're going to have to tackle after this summit, because Ambassador Valasek was hinting at this. We now have to reckon with the fact that a country is going to become more vulnerable in the period between when it gets an invitation and when it actually joins the alliance and becomes a recipient of the Article 5 guarantee. There's going to be a period of high vulnerability, and we have to think through what we're going to do in that period in light of the new strategic situation in which we're dealing. That's not going to be an easy one, but of course we have to ensure that when we do bring them in, that Article 5 is credible for whether it's for Montenegro or for Georgia. And that too is become a more difficult challenge now that Russia views us as an adversary and views NATO enlargement as an out-and-out threat.
It's an excellent point that I haven't heard before. I think we have time for one more question as we await the Vice President's arrival. So this gentleman in the second row, please.
We got extra time.
Ambassador. Do you think the alliance and the democratic West lost the moment to react or the ability to prevent? Because it's two basic notions that I think need readjustment. Thank you.
The question is, have we lost the ability to react and certainly and to prevent sort of gains by Russia that have already happened or that soon may happen? Yes, sir.
Well, I think what we're dealing with today is the consequences of the actions of Russia and us in the past. And we made mistakes. We gave a lot of tactical advantages and victories to Russia, and we need to be sure. We need to make sure that we're not going to give them any more tactical victories, deny them this kind of victories in the future. But in the long term, in 10 years from now, if you see Russia, I mean, there's going to be a change there as well. And this is exactly how we should structure our strategy to them. I mean, they were raising their own regime's worst enemies, their children, because they were sending them out in the Western society, and these people will come to power in 10, 12 years from now, and they will be thinking more like we are thinking today. So this is why I'm optimistic about long-term future, but today we have to forge the response that we need to have against Russia.
Excellent. Yes, sir.
Well, I definitely don't believe that we have lost the ability to act. And indeed, with the benefit of hindsight, we might say that we should have done some things differently, say in 2008 or earlier this year. But actually, we are still very much able to act and react. And indeed, what we've seen actually as these immediate measures have been very encouraging. We've seen earlier today there were Danish fighter aircraft landing in Estonia. This Monday we saw a company from the 173rd US Airborne Brigade land in Estonia. I think this deterrent value of these capabilities goes far beyond their numbers. And indeed, this is language, I think, that Putin knows very well. So our ability to act and react is still very much there, and we should not shy away from actually using that ability when really necessary, because I believe this change in the security environment is going to be with us for some time. We are in this for a long haul, and we should really make sure that we will not go back to business as usual after the sort of de-escalation of these immediate tensions on the Ukraine's eastern border.
And I think to add to the answer, we heard from Ambassador Versbow that there's additional measures to come later this year and beyond. And so this is sort of a down payment, a short-term down payment on a longer-term endeavor. Other questions from the audience? Yes, the gentleman in the middle.
Don't ignore Harlan.
Thank you very much, Patu Kutelia and McCain Institute.
Can you speak up a little bit and identify yourself?
Patu Kutelia and McCain Institute. I'm from Georgia. Thank you, very interesting panel, and I think this was one of the most synchronized panel in the conference. My question is particularly to the Sandy Versbow. In Chicago Summit communique, there was a special paragraph dedicated to the Black Sea as an important region for the NATO. In 2011, congressional hearings, Admiral Stavridis mentioned necessity of having a foothold capability for future force posture and having this in Black Sea region. And just recently there was a comments of President Obama in important regions for the future contingencies. And in this statement, as close as Mr. President came was the Mediterranean, but the Black Sea was omitted as a region of the importance. So my question is, what are the plans, or if there are no, what should be the plans in terms of the regional approach to the Black Sea security, especially after the Crimea, where Russia is building up its military force, and potentially we will see that newest French model Navy ship deployed for Russians. The contract is going on as well. Thank you.
Well, we are actively looking at NATO's maritime strategy and its force posture, deployment patterns, as something that we hope to decide at the Wales Summit. We did, as you mentioned, in 2011 actually adopt a new alliance maritime strategy, but it has never really been fully operationalized. And I think now, in light of the need to show presence on a more continuing basis in both in the Baltic region and in the southern region, we're going to put more focus on NATO's standing maritime groups, getting more contributions to those groups, because sometimes they only have one ship in them on a given day, so that we can show presence and provide a stronger deterrent and reassurance message. As between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, of course, the Black Sea introduces questions relating to the Montreux Convention and such. But I think, as you've seen in recent weeks, there's been no hesitation to rotate ships into the Black Sea in the current period. And I think that that'll get special attention in the debate over how to operationalize the maritime strategy.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. I think I hear the Vice President. Why don't we, I think we have a lady in the back, but I don't know if we can get her to the microphone.
Yes,
Oh,
we
yeah.
hear him. Oh, man.
Who will get here first, the microphone or the Vice President?
So a brief, clear question. We'll have a brief answer, and then I'll give instructions on what we do next.
Right. In light of the Budapest memorandum, first of all, my name is Ilana Mazurkevich from the Ukrainian Human Rights Committee. In light of the Budapest memorandum, I realized it wasn't a NATO memorandum, but NATO countries signed it, especially Germany. Now, I want to know, how safe and secure do you, ministers, feel in light of this memorandum, where they were guaranteed, Ukraine was guaranteed its territorial integrity and sovereignty for giving up its nuclear weapons? Can you please answer that? Thank you.
So how safe do the three ministers feel in light of the Budapest memorandum and what we've seen happen?
Well, as I said, we in Estonia have full confidence in NATO Article 5, but I think that Budapest Memorandum and the guarantees given to Ukraine by that document are really, really important, and they demonstrate that actually this crisis may have or consequences that go far beyond this sort of NATO collective security. Because as was said in the question, Ukraine decided to give up its nuclear arsenal, which was the third largest in the world by that memorandum. And I wonder what the Iranians, for example, may be reading into the unfolding of this crisis, because we are trying to persuade them to give up their nuclear ambition and try to persuade them that they have no security-related fears if they so do. But they have read something quite different into this situation, and I think that it makes this a very big credibility issue for the international community as to how we resolve this crisis.
Excellent point. I'm told we should wrap up. Let me give instructions for what's coming next before we thank our panelists. Please remain in your seats as the Vice President arrives. Also, immediately following his remarks will be Mr. Burrs, Albright, and Mr. Hadley on remembrances of the enlargement architects. So please remain in your seats also after the Vice President departs, and I think now we'll await his imminent arrival, and I'll bring the panel to their seats in the front. But thank you. Please join me in thanking the panel for their excellent remarks.